Years ago, when Johnny Carson was the host of The Tonight Show, he interviewed an 8-year-old boy. The young man was asked to appear because he had rescued 2 of his friends from a coal mine shaft in West Virginia, and there had been much notoriety about his bravery. Johnny questioned the young man, and it became apparent in their conversation that this young man was a Christian. Johnny asked him if he attended Sunday school, and he said that indeed he did. And he said, "Well, what are you learning in Sunday school?" And he said, "Last week our lesson was about when Jesus went to the wedding and turned water into wine." Now the audience thought that was hysterically funny for some reason. And Johnny tried to keep a straight face. And then he said to the young boy, "And what did you learn from that story about turning the water into wine?" And the boy squirmed in his chair, very apparent that he hadn't really given it a lot of thought. And then his face lit up and he answered and he said, "If you're going to have a wedding, make sure you invite Jesus." If you're going to have a wedding, be sure you invite Jesus. It's as good an answer as I can think of. We're told that the invitations went out. The invitation would have read something like this: Aaron Weinstein and Abraham Mosser invite you to the marriage of their children, Zachariah and Kiva. The festivities will begin at sundown on the first day of the week Nisan. You see, all this is being arranged by the fathers. In that culture and in that time, the men ran everything. There would have been a dowry involved in this wedding. It had been negotiated between the 2 families. The young man would have a year in which to meet the terms of the dowry. The dowry could have been anything from so many head of livestock, or a piece of ground that would be tilled for a common garden for both families, whatever was agreed to. And there would be that 1 year of meeting the terms of that agreement. And when it was met, then and only then would the invitations go out. The invitations would set the time and the place, the date. On the day of the wedding, the groom would come escorted by a number of virgin women, young girls, who were there to attend to the needs of the bride. The groom would come to the bride's house with those young women, and then those young women would escort the bride to the groom's house because that's where the wedding would take place. The rabbi would be there to officiate. After the wedding, the celebration would begin. The groom's mother would turn over her kitchen to friends and neighbors, others that had been enlisted to provide the food, and it was up to the groom's family to provide the drink. Now you have to understand that those bridesmaids also came with containers of oil that would feed the lamps. Because this thing wasn't going to stop at sundown, nor at midnight. It would last at least a week. A week. And at the entrance to the groom's house, it would be these huge stone vessels filled with water. And all of the guests who came would wash their hands, their feet, splash a little on their face, a form of cleanliness symbolic of purification. And those, we are told, 6 huge 20-gallon water jugs were sitting there at the front of the house, at the entranceway. Jesus arrives with 5 of his friends. Hey, there's a party. Let's go. Obviously, this is at the very beginning of the story of Jesus and his disciples. Cana is a half-day's walk from Nazareth, and that's how the guests would arrive on foot. Tired, hot, weary. Those stone jars provided the water to cleanse and to cool. Usually the groom's mother would enlist the help of her female friends, and one of whom might even be the chief caterer. We still do this. Someone's having a wedding, ask your best friend if they will help out. It still goes on. So it's quite possible that Jesus' mother had some responsibility with the family for seeing that things went well, that there was plenty of food and plenty of drink. We are told that it wasn't too long after the festivities began that Mary runs to Jesus and very excitedly, I'm sure, says, they've run out of wine. They've run out of wine. Now, it was the custom at these weddings, and duplicated in our own fashion, I might add, that you serve the good stuff first. And after everybody's got a good buzz on, then you go down grade-wise. You know, from the $20 a bottle down to the $2.50 a bottle. Mary runs to Jesus and says, they're running out of wine. Do something. And I love the response. The English translation is much nicer than the Greek. The Greek reads, what concern of that is to me? It ain't my problem. Notice Mary's response. Pays absolutely no attention, do something, and heads off with the expectation that he will do it. My son-in-law is Jewish, and about once every year or two we get all the families together, and I have watched his mother. I wish I had the control over my son-in-law that she does simply by speaking to him. Michael, do something. And Michael does it. Mary says to Jesus, we're running out of wine, do something. Now those 6 huge pots of water that are on the front porch that are used for the purification of washing off the dirt from one's feet and hands, cooling one's brow, are emptied. And Jesus says, fill them with fresh water. When they're full, take a ladle of it to the steward, the guy in charge, the caterer. And he tastes it and commends Jesus Most people serve the bad stuff about this time. This is the good stuff. This is the good stuff. And the party goes on. It's a great story. In John's Gospel, there are no miracles. There are signs. Signs. That's what they're called. And there are 7 of them. And I already talked about this earlier before church with some folks in the library. I really like John's Gospel for a number of reasons. But the use of the word signs, I find certainly more modern than the word miracle. Miracles are things that we don't understand and can't explain, don't happen very often, and quite often are trivialized. I can say of my son-in-law, he showed up and he was quiet. That's a miracle. But signs always point to something else. Signs always point to another reality. And in John's Gospel, these 7 events, beginning with this one of the water into wine, points to the uniqueness of Jesus, of His ability, not so much about turning water into wine, that's enough, but it points to the joyfulness, the completeness, the joy and partiness, if you will, that takes place in His presence. It's much more than just water into wine. It's a great story. Wonderful way to begin John's Gospel. There are those who say there are no more signs, no more miracles, no more burning bushes, if you will. But that's just not true. It's not true. You see, the problem is that we have lost our capacity to see those things and to appreciate them. The season of Epiphany begins with that wonderful childlike story of a star leading astrologers to a barn where there is a young infant recently born. It's a wonderful story. Children hear that story and buy into it. Adults say, doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. You see, we have lost that childlike quality to see miracles, things that are hidden truths about beauty and love that we cannot possibly rationally understand but only enjoy. Miracles do occur every day. What that story tells us, it seems to me, that we need to somehow rediscover that childlike ability to see those hidden truths and beauty that surround us. How do we do that? How do we do that? Well, for one thing, we get to our children at a very early age with something other than the science. I see 6-year-old kids in the grocery store with a cell phone, running some sort of app. What about sitting in front of a piece of art and hearing how it came to be? What about a piece of music? It's different than they hear on the radio or play on their cell phone. A piece of music that rolls over you and sets loose some sorts of feelings that are wonderful. We've lost that ability. And we're not teaching it to our children or our grandchildren. So as parents and godparents and grandparents, anything that we can do that opens those things of beauty, those things that move the heart and the spirit, those things that we can help our children and grandchildren to appreciate, so that they can see the signs that really are there. Last week was a memorable week here, running back and forth, meeting our contractor with the organ and having it voiced. You haven't heard anything yet. The hymns are subdued. This place really rocks when that volume is turned up. It's a great noise. The fellow who tuned the organ is hit of music for the Roswell United Methodist Church. It happens to seat 2,200 people. And he has a big organ. He filled this place so that the walls actually shook. And as Laurie gets used to it, we hear it more, we'll appreciate it as much. It's music that moves us. We need to appreciate it. But last week I had a visitor in my office. Nice man, in his early 40s, I would guess. Came in and asked me, he started the conversation by saying, it's such a beautiful church. Absolutely, this is the way a church ought to look. And in the background was that organ being played. It not only looked like a church ought to look, it sounded like one. And he said, I'd like to rent the church for my wedding. And I said, are you looking for a church home or just a place to do a wedding? He said, no, well, we just want to rent the church. It just looks like a church ought to look. And I said, well, I agree with you. And if you'd like to talk about making it your church home, I'll be happy to do that. But it's not for rent. Unfortunately, we live in this day in which we can go around, see beautiful places, beautiful churches, and say, if I just got enough money, I can rent it. That was nice, but I said it's not for rent. Look for the signs. Look for the signs. Amen.